All right. Well, hello, everyone. We're going to give everyone a minute or two here to get online. We'll get started in just a few seconds. If you're online and joining us, please feel free to send a note in the chat. Tell us who's on. We'd love to see who's here. And we'll just get going in just a few moments here. So feel free to drop things in the chat if you'd like. See the numbers climbing. That's good. All right, we'll get started in about 15, 20 seconds. You can use the Q&A feature as well. We'll be monitoring that. All right, looks like chat is disabled. We'll get that live. We'll get that going so you can actually use the chat. Thank you, Christina and Shane. Appreciate that. All right, we'll get that going in a minute.
I'm getting text from people to that effect, Doug. So there's a wide audience out there of people who want to tell us who they are.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll go ahead and get started. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. We're really glad that you're here with us on a Friday afternoon. We have a lot of folks signed up for this webinar, which is terrific. So thank you for being here. My name's Doug Schneider. I'm a partner at AmPhil, and AmPhil is a integrated professional services firm. We work with a wide range of organizations, and our mission is to strengthen civil society. So work with nonprofits, including many faith-based organizations and institutions, help them to raise more money. And we're fortunate to be hosting this webinar with our good friends from the Barna Group, who help Christian leaders understand the times and to know what to do. In its nearly 40-year history, Barna Group has conducted more than 2 million interviews over the course of thousands of studies, and really has become the go-to source for insights about faith and culture, leadership and vocation, and the generations. Barna Group has worked with thousands of businesses, nonprofits, and organizations across the country and around the world, including, I know, many of you who are joining us today. They do terrific research, terrific surveys. I have a couple examples here. Their work, I certainly recommend that you check them out if you get a chance or are not familiar with them. Today's topic for the webinar is leveraging generosity trends for your nonprofit in 2024. We're really excited about the topic today. We're going to explore emerging trends in charitable giving. The information I've presented here and the discussion that will take place, I think, will be of interest and hopefully beneficial for you all. Our goal is for you to be informed, to understand what Barna is seeing in their data and research, and then to make wise decisions for you and your organization, and specifically how you communicate with and engage your supporters. I have here with me today Matt Randerson, who is the Vice President of Growth and Operations at the Barna Group. He works with parachurch organizations to identify the most important business opportunities using research. Prior to joining Barna, Matt worked for a Fortune 300 company designing compelling engagement offerings for church pastors around the country. He is a graduate of Lee University, where he received a degree in pastoral ministry, as well as an undergraduate minor in religious studies. He's based in Atlanta with his wife, is an avid golfer, and impressively got his first hole-in-one at age 16, which tells me he probably has more than one hole-in-one playing golf. I don't have that to my record. We also have with me my colleague, Jeremy Beer. He's co-founder and executive chairman of our firm, AmPhil. Jeremy has worked with hundreds of nonprofits over the years. He hosts our podcasts, Givers, Doers, and Thinkers, and speaks regularly on philanthropy and fundraising. He's also the author of several books, including one book which I have here, The Forgotten Foundations of Fundraising. I highly recommend it, as well as, just for fun, his more recent book, Oscar Charleston, The Life and Legend of Baseball's Greatest Forgotten Player. It has nothing to do with this webinar whatsoever.
Nothing at all.
But it's a good read, and it tells you about his passion for baseball In fact, I know he's on a quest to visit every single minor league stadium in the U.S. So maybe you can tell us about that later, or you can ask him about it outside of this webinar. So here's how this is going to go. We're going to have about 45 minutes in total together. Matt's going to present some data and findings. He's going to look at three key trends, emerging trends specifically. Jeremy will respond to that. I'm going to monitor the Q&A, and so toward the end, we'll jump in with some Q&A with you all. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Matt.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, AmPhil and team, for having Barna here. We're really excited to. It's been such a joy over the last couple of months just getting to collaborate with you on some of these trends and hearing your perspective mixed with ours, and really looking forward to this time. And Doug, to your point or question around the hole-in-one, I actually only have one hole-in-one. I was trying to be a little bit prophetic here to say that there may be some in my future. So my first one was 16. TBD on number 2. So, but thanks for having us here, Jeremy, and looking forward to jumping into some conversation with all of you. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here just to guide us through the time. And as you would expect, we're going to be looking at some data, which we'll pause and we'll have some discussion. And as we go through this, if you truly do have any questions, as Doug mentioned, please go ahead and drop those in the chat and we'll get to those. But we want to get us started with a poll question. How do you feel about your nonprofit in 2024? Are you feeling great, feeling okay, feeling anxious, uncertain, not sure? Working for a research company, I can't help but ask a poll question here. So please take a moment. You should see the poll on your screen. How are you feeling about your nonprofit in 2024? All right, so we'll give just another 10 seconds. All right, if you haven't done so, please go ahead and throw in your response here. And Doug is going to be sharing those results with us later on in our time today. So let's go ahead and jump in. We're going to talk about 3 major trends. And before we do that, there's just kind of one table set that we need to put out there, and that is the use of generations. Think of this as a little bit of a lens through which we're going to look at some of the data and insights over the time that we'll spend here together. So whether you're Barna or Gallup or Pew or really many, many large research institutions, the use of generations is incredibly helpful. It's not perfect, but it is certainly helpful. Why is it helpful? Because it helps us understand from one age cohort to the next what matters, what may be changing, what's important. So undoubtedly, there are some things, whether you're 88 or 18 years old, that we share in common. And there's also some things that we share that are fairly divergent. And it's our job and our opportunity as nonprofit leaders, as business leaders, to understand some of these differences. And so we just want to set this up for you as we move through the data and our conversation. Generations will absolutely be a part of that. So again, it is not a perfect tool, but it is a tool that helps us understand trends and changes and what might be shifting. So with that, I'd love, Jeremy, is there anything you'd love to offer up quickly before we jump in on the kind of topic and array of generations at all? Anything you'd want to add to the table?
Not really, Matt. I probably will ask you myself at some point a question that people might have themselves, which is, how much of this generational stuff is sticky, or does it change as people themselves age? So maybe I'll just put that on the table right now for you to address maybe at the appropriate time, if to the extent that we have any data that speaks to that.
Yeah, perfect. All right, so let's jump into our very first trend here. Trend number 1, consumerism and generosity. How we think about and using our dollars is changing. How we're using our dollars is changing. So here you see kind of this interesting constellation of brands. Some of these you might be really familiar with. Some of these you might get behind the wheel of or enjoy as a dessert. These brands have something in common. What they have in common is this blending of consumerism and philanthropy. Some call it philanthrocapitalism. It's a little bit of a mouthful, but it is a blending of doing good and the consumptions of products and services. Probably the one that most of us are highly familiar with over the span of multiple decades actually is Tom's Shoes, the kind of buy one pair of shoes, get another one given away to someone in need. So this was this really big kind of new business model that burst onto the scene that blended the consumer side and the philanthropy side of things. Well, what we want to highlight for you is that this trend has only grown massively, and it's moved far beyond just the idea of a one-for-one model. There's so many things, if you're familiar with Patagonia and what they've done in the last year and a half with giving away their profits. Interestingly enough, I love to call this one out, but Apple, if you saw the recent product release around their Apple Watch and what they're committing to as an organization or company for the next, I think it's 10 years, is to become a carbon neutral company. So that means everything that they're going to churn out at some point, you look at the ledger and it's quote unquote carbon neutral. So what that tells you and what they're seeking to do is they're recognizing that this carbon neutrality or less of a carbon footprint is important to the consumer. So it's a good business decision to kind of mix that in with your products and services. One of the things that they coined within their marketing language in a recent product release was good for you, good for the globe. And so this was this tapping into this idea that I, as a consumer, get something good and I'm doing good. So there's a little bit of a psychology of generosity and philanthropy that is really being taken on by brands. And it's important for us to pay attention to this trend. One of the things that we wanted to do is we actually wanted to ask a research question on this. So I'm going to walk us through this here quickly, and then I'm going to pause. And Jeremy, I'd love to get your thoughts on this. So this was just this last summer. Barna asked the question, if given the choice between purchasing a good, such as an article of clothing or a household item, in which a portion of the proceeds support an important cause, such as hunger or poverty, or donating directly to a charity supporting that same cause, which would you choose? Here you see all US adults, 35% say, actually, I would be more likely to purchase a good in which a portion of the proceeds supported the cause. 48% of all US adults would say, just donating directly to the cause is what I would prefer. Here's where it gets really interesting. You can see it in the data set quite clearly. Is you look at Gen Z, 49%, almost 50% of Gen Z are raising their hand and saying, hey, I would purchase that good. And if a portion of the proceeds go to support of the cause, I would choose that over donating directly to the cause. And as you go down the list, you see millennials, Gen X, boomers, and elders. There's a pretty consistent stair step down into this idea of, again, kind of philanthropic capitalism. I get to purchase a good, and in that process, something positive happens versus just donating directly to the cause. So I'll pause here. Jeremy, what comes to mind for you as you look at this data? I know sometimes it might be really encouraging and maybe there's a little bit of discouragement in this. What do you see as you look at this data?
Yeah, there's so many ways to look at this, right? So just on the surface, you might say, yes, if your goal is to capture engagement, in particular donor engagement from younger generations, let's just call Gen Z, millennials, the younger generations, having some way for them to consume as well as give. Maybe there's some sort of partnership with some sort of for-profit, provider of some good or service that helps make that happen, or you do it yourselves. It could be a very good thing. I mean, that'd be a way to according to this data, capture 40 to 50%, or at least to be in the space where 40 to 50% of them would prefer to be. The other way to look at this is, 80 to 90% of your philanthropic revenue likely comes from the boomers and elders right now. Mm-hmm. And so the other way to look at this is like 80% of them ish want to just donate directly to a cause. So you don't have to be super concerned right now about sort of the trend that we're seeing among younger generations. But the question is going to be, will Gen Zers and millennials continue to think this way as they age into their giving years? And if you're trying to engage them now, then it's going to be important to figure out some way to do that. I think the broader point is like that consuming our consumption choices is more and more how people construct their identities today. So that would be my bigger philosophical, I think, takeaway
Yeah, it's
from
good.
this. A lot of the traditional sources of identity are like less accessible or less available to younger people, especially now, than they were in the past. That you kind of your place, your family, your particular denomination, various associations you might have belonged to in older generations are just kind of gone now or attenuated for younger people. So consumption is a big, big part of how people construct their identities, but they also construct their identities through how they give too. And that's something I think we'll come back to later. But the general point I would say is like identity. This speaks to sort of how tapping into people's identities, who they think they are, or who they want to be, what they aspire to be, is just like vitally important for connecting with people.
Yeah. Yeah. Jeremy, I appreciate those thoughts are really good, especially around identity. And we could have a whole conversation around how people kind of express their identity and their values by associating with brands and with, like as you said, maybe in institutions, churches, denominations. There's a whole kind of underlying kind of shift taking place within society, and it's obviously having some degree of effect, whether that's good or bad or how we think about it. But nonetheless, this is an important trend for nonprofits to pay attention to, as it's having some effect on our efforts. So, Jeremy, in a conversation earlier, you had asked me, so, hey, Matt, like, could you look at that data by Christians and by generations? And the answer is yes. So I'm going to pull up here what we see. This is that same data set. And there's probably maybe some hypotheses of, okay, well, what about Christians? Would they be more likely to, kind of not fall into the consumerism as philanthropy category? Well, actually, what we see here is generally it's not true. So I'm going to just toggle back and forth here just briefly. So if you look at all US adults, you see 35%. You see all Gen Z, all millennials. This is both Christian and non-Christian. You see a percentage change by maybe just 2 or 3 points as you look down these generations. But again, it's fairly consistent that as younger generations are looking at generosity, looking at consumerism, they're more prone to do this kind of purchases of good and supporting a cause. So anyways, it's kind of an interesting, and Jeremy, I thank you so much for the prompt on that, knowing that part of the work you do and the part of the work that Barna does is really so focused on the Christian community and the faith community.
Yeah. Yeah. I was somewhat, I don't know if I was surprised, but I was interested to see that the same exact pattern holds within a couple of percentage points. So this is not something that's just in the secular world. Christian self-identified Christians are thinking the same way about consumption and identity.
Yeah,
monitoring the chat real quickly, and maybe we'll come back to this later, especially in the Q&A. But there's a few comments also, asking the question, well, Gen Z and millennials, is it just an age factor, and are they going to reflect and look more like the boomers and elders over time? And you may be thinking, Matt, there may be some research that you've done in other studies, that might answer that, or maybe not. But I just call that out. It's, as I'm watching the chat, that's something that's been commented on. Yeah,
it's probably one of the biggest questions that people have when it comes around to the construct of generations, is say, well, is a Gen Zer just going to be like a boomer when they become the boomer's age? And it's a fair question, and part of the answer is like, we don't know. And at the same time, too, one of the things to consider is that as quantitative research is happening year over year over year, it is a representation and a measurement of change. And we're using generations by which as a kind of a mechanism for measuring that change. So it's just important to just keep that in mind, that I know sometimes we can say millennials are this, Gen Z is that, which has some truth to it, but actually they're a little bit more pliable and malleable to be the ones expressing the change that we're seeing in the world. You typically see that through younger generations versus older generations. All right, let's move into trend number 2. Trend number 2 is cause-minded culture. So causes are top of mind and outpace institutions. So before I click to this next slide, you're going to see a lot of data. Don't worry, I'll walk you through it. So don't squint your eyes too hard. But there's a message that I want you to capture on this next one. So we asked, which of these are you currently donating to? You see a whole array of causes along the bottom. You see the Christian church, you see social justice, Christian ministries. You see a wide variety of causes here. And so we're asking people, where are you donating your money to? And it's pretty clear. There's one chart, there's one bar that just stands out from the rest, and that is the Christian church. So elders are the ones that saying that they're donating their money currently to the Christian church. And what you also see is there's a wide array of places that people are giving their monies to. And so this wasn't a question of how much. This was just, where are you currently donating to? And so this kind of underscores the idea that the cause mindedness is really important for us to think about, especially as nonprofits. And Jeremy and Doug, I'm even thinking about the conversations that we were having leading up to this webinar of, hey, do nonprofits think of themselves as institution, or do they think of themselves as cause or causes? Or what's the mix, or what's the order of operations? What would you kind of say or share with us around this data, the idea of causes, institutions, and the nonprofits that are kind of tuning into this call here?
And you have some, I'll say, point out too, that you've got a graph later showing distrust that specifically calls how trust of institutions is going down.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think you pair that with this, like, is this, again, we don't know if it's an age effect or a generational thing that will stick necessarily, but certainly that Christian church bar seems to indicate it goes well with what we see in terms of the decline in trust of institutions. To the extent that this is showing, and the other data you have, kind of a preference for causes rather than institutions. Yeah, I don't think that's there's no secret that distrust of institutions has risen greatly. There's still plenty of generosity among younger generations, as your slides show. But I think it affirms a point that's been true for a while now, which is that you want to be a mission-forward organization, not an institution-forward organization. So my message here would be like, watch your pronouns. And what I mean by that is your we's. Who is the we, and how you think about what you're doing. If the we is an institution, we're us on the inside and you're on the outside, you're doing it wrong, and you're certainly probably going to turn off younger generations even more than you would in anybody else. But you're going to turn off kind of everybody. The we should be inclusive of donors who are on the same side of the table as you. That's the we together pursuing a cause, not like an institution talking to customers on the outside, if that makes sense. That's a thought that comes to my mind when I've been seeing this data, Matt.
Yeah, that's great, Jeremy.
Matt, real quick,
go ahead,
there's
Doug.
one question that's come through. Someone had asked in the Q&A just where the pro-life ministries and pro-life organizations may have fallen in these categories.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I would have to ask the research teams. Okay. So there's a degree of like how many options can you put within a question set, and it looks like that wasn't specifically one that was asked within this question set.
Okay, maybe we'll get back.
Yeah, great. So borrowing from that same data set, here's something to kind of add on to this idea of the rise of cause-mindedness versus institutions. Using that same data set, we found that 32% of Gen Z is currently donating to 3 or more of those causes that you found. Millennials, 28%, boomers, 10%, elders, 24%. So again, what you see here is this idea that of these options, it's not just one, it's not just two, but those that are giving to 3 or more of these that you see across the bottom, the generations that are more likely to be involved in multiple, you see Gen Z and you see millennials, and then you see Gen X, and you see just 10% of boomers are involved in 3 or more of those causes and where they're directing their dollars. Jeremy, is there anything you want to add on that?
Surprising.
I see a smile on the face. Yeah.
Isn't that super surprising to you? I don't really understand that. But it's very encouraging. I mean, if this is one trend that sticks, that'd be great for the future of generosity in America. But I'm really just dumbfounded by that boomer number. I have no idea what to make of it.
Yeah. So it's important for us to think about all of this cause-minded conversation is happening against the backdrop of what you talked about, Jeremy, was this a little bit of the decline in the trust in institutions. And so, borrowing from our friends at Gallup, essentially what this chart is telling you is the average confidence that U.S. adults have in institutions over time. You see this tracked all the way back from 1979 all the way through 2022. And you can see where the trend is going. And so we're in this cultural moment where causes are really important. We even see that with some of our global teenage research. There's such a cause-mindedness to the next generation globally, but it's also happening against this backdrop where we are really starting to not trust institutions. So, Jeremy, I'll click to the next slide, but you've got some thoughts that you've been working on and kind of forming related to a lot of this. So I'll turn it over to you for what are we looking at here?
Well, all this data made us think about this as a particular slide that we bring up a lot in our consulting or training we do for nonprofit leaders. And I thought of this when I was seeing your data because it is so important. People are looking, because there's so much distrust of institutions and because there's been such a sort of collapse of the institutions and associations that form civil society. People are like longing for finding a sources of identity, of figuring out who they are. And I think that's what we're seeing in that consumption data that you shared earlier. And they long for a sense of belonging to things. Now, they don't always articulate it this way, but I think that like a latent human nature desire is out there. And one of the things we're always preaching, really, I guess, to the people we're talking to is tapping into that, serving those needs to construct an identity and figure out who you are and who you're meant to be, serving that need for having a sense of belonging to something larger than yourself. Is actually, there's no deeper or more profound key to sort of success in engaging donors than being able to tap into those and serve those needs. So this slide just sort of just shows that, and this like stories, relationships, experiences are sort of the tools we talk about as how that is done, how that's accomplished, tapping into identity and belongingness. I could talk about that more in the Q&A if you want, but it was this sort of graphic is what came to mind in thinking about all the data you presented so far.
Well, and Jeremy, real quickly, I mean, maybe you can address this later real quick now, but it does really, I mean, messaging is important. I mean, like how you message and how you frame, and I don't know. I mean, I'm curious, what your thoughts are on that. Like, I mean, what even just like language that one uses, is there any like practical advice that you might give to a nonprofit with all this in mind?
As you know, that's a huge topic, but language for, again, watch your pronouns, the we, bring them into the we. You and I, the donor, but that's the we, not you and your colleagues at a nonprofit. That's not your we when you're talking to donors. The we is donors and you together, pursuing some cause, addressing some issue, solving some problem. So that's one way, Doug, I think messaging is effective when you think this way. Another is use membership language, community language, not transactional language, which maybe that's in tension with the consumer stuff we saw before. I don't know, but I don't think it is, right? I think one reason those brands that we saw that you highlighted earlier, Matt, are like, they don't present themselves as like a company selling stuff to people. They present themselves, again, as a community that you enter into in part by consuming items, but in part in all these other ways, right? And you're part of a community when you buy an Apple or a Tesla or whatever. So I think importing that kind of thinking into how we talk about ourselves as nonprofits is like very, very powerful.
Yeah, it's great thoughts there, Jeremy. None of those companies are running around saying, "Hey, here's all the stuff we want to sell you." That's not how it works with them. That's great. Good. Well, anything else from the AmPhil team here before we jump into the third trend?
No, move on.
All right. Cool. So this last trend here that we want to offer up to you for consideration is we're kind of calling it the trust factor. So the broader backdrop of skepticism or lack of trust. So let's ask a poll question here quickly. So if we can pull this up, when you think about the issues that concern you the most, which of the following do you believe are responsible to create meaningful change? We're asking you, audience members, to answer this question. When you think about the issues that concern you the most, which of the following do you believe are responsible to create meaningful change? So give you just a moment here, select all that apply: government, myself, schools, major corporations, social media. Take a moment here and just answer this poll question. All right, we'll give you another couple of seconds here. All right, and if it's possible, I'd love to pull up those results. Everyone should see this come up on their screen as to what you selected. So let's take a look here. So when you think about the issues that concern you the most, which of the following do you believe are responsible to create meaningful change? Here we see number one, it looks like we're pretty close. Myself, 66%. Government is looks like probably about the middle of the range. We have a great degree of looking to the Christian church, nonprofits with a religious affiliation. Social media is really low. Local business is a little bit lower. Major corporations. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to participate in that poll. Because what I want to do now is show you what we found in the research, because we asked that exact same question, and think about where you answered and maybe to what we'll see in the national research. So again, we asked, when you think about the issues that concern you the most, which of the following do you believe are responsible to create meaningful change? Here, number one, we see the government. Number two, we see myself, schools, education, institutions, major corporations, social media. Towards the far right-hand side, you see Christian churches, nonprofits with a religious affiliation. I want to pause here for a second and say, this was all US adult data. When we go into the data and we look and say, hey, US Christians, what would you say the Christian church and Christian or nonprofits with a religious affiliation, that number goes up. So, which makes naturally sense that if you're a person of faith and you're a Christian, that your degree of sense of responsibility on part of the Christian church and nonprofits with a religious affiliation, you would expect and lean on them to help create change. So just want to make sure that's a piece that we don't get too concerned about. And as we look at this data, you might be looking at the far left-hand side of this and saying government, interesting. So we as a society are saying, hey, the government is responsible for creating meaningful change. And we'll dive into this actually a little bit further, but one way that I have thought about this data, and we've talked about it as a team, is think of this through the lens of infrastructure and scalability. So in some capacities, it kind of makes sense as we're looking to say, there's change and there are things that need to be addressed in society. It instinctually kind of makes sense for us to say, oh, that's the government's responsibility because, again, of the infrastructure and scale and resource that they have. Now, let's jump to the next question. Still thinking about the same issues that concern you the most, which of the following do you trust to create meaningful change? If the last one was asking who's responsible, this one we're looking at who do you trust to create that change? And here you see we're a pretty trusting society, mostly just in ourselves to create change. I mean, it's 2 to 1 on almost every other option, at least. You do see here nonprofits with no religious affiliation, school, government. I mean, it's a precipitous decline, and then it's pretty much flat across the board. And so I don't. as I look at this data, sometimes I'm encouraged, sometimes I'm a little bit discouraged. But I want to offer up just a few thoughts here. I think it is again telling of this reality that we have a trust factor. We have a trust factor issue in our culture and our society that we seem to default to skepticism, a little bit of guilty until proven innocent instead of innocent until proven guilty. And so there's a macro water in some ways that we're all swimming in, and it's just important for us to be mindful of it as nonprofit leaders. If you're feeling headwinds of lack of trust, that I feel like people are just default skeptical of me and my work or my nonprofit, it might not be you. It is just a little bit of, seems to be the air that is surrounding our society and our culture right now. So I want to pause there. Jeremy, Doug, what have you been thinking about? What have you been reflecting on as you've looked at this data around responsibility, around who do we trust to create change? Anything that you have on your end for observations?
I had a couple of thoughts. One is this 50% of US adults thinking they're the ones who are most responsible, or who they trust, I should say, not most responsible. The only people they trust to create meaningful change.
Yeah.
It's just another data point that sort of affirms that position donors as the hero in the story. Because people are already thinking to themselves, like many people, and probably more than 50% of Christians, that's who they trust. And I think probably among your Christians, certainly in our poll, that's who people also think is largely responsible. So positioning donors as the heroes of the story, I mean, that's just a general a good practice, but probably even more important in a low trust context like we're operating in today. The second thing I would say is like the antidote to a lack of trust is authentic relationships. So investing in relationship building is crucial, more crucial than ever, because people are not going to just trust your institution naturally. So really reaching out and investing in building relationships, probably something that most Christian organizations and ministries are underinvested in, I would say, because it's hard to do. So those are the thoughts that came to my mind.
Yeah, if I may, I mean, I would just second that. I actually would interpret this, well, kind of on the whole of it, it might be a little overwhelming and slightly depressing. But if you're a nonprofit and you're messaging properly and you're bringing donors into the life of the organization, you're really partnering with them to be the solution. And so if this is, the data is accurate, they think, myself, I have a responsibility and I trust myself to actually be able to like have results and make a difference and meaningful change. Well, you become a vehicle in the channel by which they can do that. It's really difficult for an individual to do that or a family to do that in and of themselves. They need a partner. You become the partner in the vehicle by which they can achieve that. So I would interpret it as a positive, or at least as an opportunity that could be taken advantage of if you're a nonprofit.
Yeah, that's great. And Jeremy, I love what you were talking about, authentic relationships. In at times when it seems like society is lacking in something, when you do find it, it becomes that much sweeter and that much more special. So to be a nonprofit leader, to be an organization that says, hey, we seek authentic relationships with the people that choose to give their hard-earned dollars and their hard-earned hours or their spare hours that they have and resources to help fund our mission. I think you're going to stand out head and shoulders amongst the crowd. And if I were to offer up one tangible kind of word of encouragement to all of the people on the call here as nonprofit leaders, think about 2024 and ask yourselves, how can we increase our relational service area? Don't leave just the authentic relationship work up. Don't leave that to just your development person or persons or team. Say, actually, how do we as an entire organization, as a nonprofit, say we want to embody authentic relationships, and we have the opportunity to increase our relational surface area, no matter what your role is at this organization. So kind of a hopeful prayer of mine to all of you is thinking about ways where you can increase your relational service area in 2024.
I like that phrase.
All right.
I'm going to steal that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's something that a few mentors of mine have been inspired and encouraged me around, and I think there's a lot of wisdom in it, hopefully for nonprofits. So let's jump to the very last data point as we again are looking at this trust factor piece. So we're going to look at a data set here, and we asked the following are all reasons you may financially give to an organization that aligns with your values. How important are each to you? We asked Gen Z, millennials, Gen X, boomers, elders. I'm going to go just from top to bottom and make one key observation about each option. So the organization uses donations effectively. It's pretty shared amongst all generations. So, yep, that's kind of number one. Not a big surprise. But you see here, boomers and elders, this is of greater significance to say effective use of the donations is really important to me. Again, important to younger generations, but you see an outsized, clear pace there with older generations. The second one, the organization is making a positive difference in the lives of people. This is actually, everything's pretty closely bunched together. There's not a lot of variance, which tells you there's kind of consistency. We talked at the beginning of this call of like, well, so generations, what is this, just the flash in the pan? Is this just a Gen Z thing? I think we can all walk away from this data set with confidence to say whether you're a Gen Z, millennial, boomer, elder, there is a shared value that the organization is making a positive difference in the lives of many people. Number three, the organization is addressing a crisis, an emergency situation, or some other type of urgent need. This one is probably my personal favorite because I look at the younger generations, so Gen Z and millennials, they're at the top at 56 and 55% as compared to older generations. What this tells me is I think there is a growing expectation out there that, hey, how quick can you be? How nimble can you be? Because we know living in a 24-hour news cycle, there's always crises and emergencies that pop up. And in some ways, we have the visibility to see them like we never have before. And so if I'm a younger generation person, I might be looking at my nonprofit and saying, like, how quick can you move? Can you get in the game? Can you respond quickly? How agile are you? Which I think it's a little bit of societally, we're pretty fast-paced individuals. So it's kind of an instantaneous narrative that I see in that data. Last one here, the organization is rated highly by groups that study the work of nonprofits. Think of this as like the charity navigators, those that kind of are a third-party validator of trust in the work of the organization. This is more important to Gen Z, as you see here, versus elders. There's a little bit of a kind of a gradual step stair down from younger generations to older generations. So I'm going to pause there. Doug, Jeremy, what questions do you want to offer up here or observations to kind of close out this last trend around the trust factor?
I don't have much to offer that you didn't just cover on this one, Matt. I think it's really good. I would say, I think that last note, that being rated highly by groups is sort of the least important, outside groups, least important factor for the four. And it probably is another mark of the lack of trust in institutions among younger generations, that they view that as more important than older people do. Like, somebody else has to come alongside me and tell me if this institution is doing good work. Even if the rate, I mean, you would think the rating institution is also an institution, but be that as it may.
Right.
That would be my interpretation of that one. But the most important thing being using donations effectively, making a positive difference in the lives of many people, to anybody across the age spectrum. Those are the two most important things.
Yeah, that's great.
That's great. Thank you, Matt. I'm going to jump into some of the Q&A that we have in our remaining time. First, though, I want to share that we are with a very positive group of folks, because I don't know if folks saw the result on that first poll that came up of how you're feeling going into the new year. I didn't catch all the data points, but 42% are feeling great and 35% are feeling okay. And the other ones are a little bit more negative. So we have a majority feeling good here. So that's encouraging. There we go. Yeah. Okay.
Super majority, not just majority.
Yeah, so good. All right. Group of positive individuals in groups. So I'm happy about that. We do have a couple questions here. Here's one that's just practical. Is there any training around building authentic relationships? Good question. Jeremy, I'll throw that to you.
Well, AmPhil does, yeah. So if you want to look at our, contact us, shoot us a note. There'll be a way to do that. We do some training for fundraisers around that. Beyond that, I'm sure there is. I haven't looked into it. I don't know if Doug or Matt, you have thoughts on
Besides ours, I mean, I would always say go to AmPhil first. Matt, you may know of any, but it's a good question. I mean, I think I know in our own training, you know, we always talk about first building relationships, relationship fundraising. I mean, there's actually, it's not a training, but there is a book called Relationship Fundraising.
Yeah,
I highly recommend it.
Yeah, that's a good book.
It's a terrific book. And if you're getting into fundraising, or even if you're a veteran, I would highly recommend reading it. I can't remember the author's name off the top of my head, but it's a simple title, Relationship Fundraising. There's another question here. Why do Gen Z trust Charity Navigator when there's such a trust and skepticism issue, broadly speaking? So it seems like there may be trust of certain institutions, but maybe not others. And I'm not sure maybe they're referring to something specific and some data point, but
well, that last data point, I think that's what I was trying to speak to. I think the reason they trust that is because they lack trust into nonprofit institutions themselves. And since there's been so much press over, a generation or so now about the particular, scandals and misuse of funds and so forth among nonprofit organizations, and there's such a general lack of trust in institutions, that is why I think they turn to a validator like a Charity Navigator. Now, is there an irony at play here? Because then you have to trust Charity Navigator. Yes, there is an irony at play here, anonymous attendee, but there you have it. Matt, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of a variable of kind of third-party validation of sorts, where we kind of want checks and balances, like who. And you're absolutely right that they in themselves are institutions, but we kind of hope that there's mechanisms within our society where we're giving kind of good checks and balances. And so I think it's a little bit of just kind of that third party effect that might be helping drive some of their behavior there.
All right, I have one more question here before we wrap up, and this is a question for you, Matt. Is there any Barna research on group motivated giving, church groups, giving clubs, donor clubs amongst the generation? So research on group.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I can, one data point I can generally kind of pluck out of my brain is we had done some work about a year and a half ago for a large foundation in which we found it was pretty clear that younger generations were more attracted to kind of group models of giving and being in community with others as they were giving versus in some capacities, which I think you see with the rise of things like GoFundMe and Kickstarter. These are all these kind of like collective group efforts in giving to something that, Jeremy, you're talking about, like, actually it's not just the act of the transaction, but you're creating community and connection with one another while you do it. You've seen the rise of those kinds of behaviors in the last several years. And in our research, we did see that there's a groupfulness, energy, and excitement with younger generations. Older generations have it to some capacity, but they tend to be people that want to keep all that a little more private. Like I want to give, but I don't want other people to know about it or receive the recognition for it.
All right. I lied. I misspoke. I'm going to ask one more question. Moderators, it's my right as a moderator. Okay.
You've got the power. Yeah.
We're going to wrap up in 2 minutes, but this question from John Moore: has there been any work on the planned giving aspects of these studies or current giving? I don't know, Matt, if you have other research on planned giving aspects of these studies, versus like cash in now, current gifts. It's a good question, especially with the intergenerational transfer of wealth that's happening right this moment.
Yeah. I think there's maybe two parallels in that question. One is planned versus spontaneous giving. So it's like, hey, every 2 weeks when I go to church, I'm going to write the check. Versus, oh, I saw something on social media, completely unplanned, didn't plan on it today, but I'm going to give. So younger generations, we do see in the data, have a higher propensity for spontaneity and unplanned giving versus older generations who tend to think of it more as a discipline, kind of a very, very kind of structured thing. I think that's lane number one in the question. And then number two would be on what you mentioned, Doug, which is the great wealth transfer, which is legacy, estate planning, things like that. We have done some research in that space, not a whole lot. I think even, probably at AmPhil, you all might have some even greater expertise in that category, and what you maybe see from the work and research that you do.
Well, I would just, John, I mean, the question, of course, we're going to find less planned giving in that sense among, younger generations. They're not doing that yet. But probably what John is trying to get at with that question is something like, will there be as many planned gifts to institutions if there's a distrust of institutions among younger generations? So as they age into when they are doing their planned giving, where's that money going to go if they don't trust institutions? That might be what John is getting at. I don't know. And of course, it's kind of an unknowable question, I suppose. But that's what came to me when I read that question. Like, that's really actually very interesting. Like, right now, it's like I can leave it to something that's got bricks and mortar. My name will go on a wall somewhere or on a building. But if you're distrustful of institutions, how does planned giving work? Good question. Good question.
I guess it means that Barna will be in business for a while longer because there's more research.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
My takeaway.
Yep.
This was great. We thank everyone for joining us and spending a Friday afternoon with us on this webinar. There's a few things. We'll be sending out a follow-up email to everyone that was on this call with some additional information. There's going to be an opportunity to sign up for Barna's update to get updated information and research and data and surveys from Barna. If you're interested in your work, I highly encourage you to do that if you haven't done that already. There will be an opportunity to schedule a complimentary call with someone from AmPhil, one of our consultants, if that's something that would interest you. If there's questions that maybe weren't addressed and topics you want to cover, we're happy to do that. There's going to be some additional survey material, Barna research on Gen Z specifically. And there are a lot of questions in chat. I couldn't even keep up with everything about Gen Z. So I think that's something that will be of interest to folks here. And then some other information about some survey work we've done, specifically the fundraising from AmPhil. So with that, I'd like to thank Matt. I'd like to thank Jeremy. Thank you all again for joining us, and hope everyone has a great rest of the day and terrific afternoon. And we'll be in touch soon with some follow-up material. Thank you.
Wonderful.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
Have a good one.
Cheers.